So my name is Erik. I'm the creative director at Fast Travel Games. It's a VR game dev in Stockholm in Sweden. We've been around for around 4.5 years. We've published 3 games so far. Apex Construct was our first one. It's a post-apocalyptic science fiction game where you shoot bow and arrow, shoot robots with bow and arrow, I guess. Set in a post-apocalyptic Sweden, actually. And then we published last year The Curious Tale of the Stolen Pets, which is definitely not a horror game. It's a very family-friendly title. Super sweet. I'm guessing we're going to see a trailer here. We also built Budget Cuts 2 with lovely people at Neat Corporation. And right now we're working on Wraith the Oblivion Afterlife, which is a horror title and which is the reason why we're here. I've been a horror fan for all my life. We actually, when we started Fast Travel Games, we had some ground rules. We say, we're not gonna build games with tons of gore in VR. We've built, a lot of us in the studio have built first-person shooters for 10, 15 years for flat screen. We said, let's not build military shooters, the first thing we do. And we said, let's not build horror games because it's so incredibly easy to scare people to death in VR. And I think, but I mean, I personally, I think maybe Andreas is the bigger horror fan in the studio, but personally, I started collecting these crappy VHS games, VHS movies in the 80s, and I've basically collected horror movies all my life. So I'm really, really happy to build something now that we hope.
I think, you're more of a purist than I am. I think you got this history horror buff thing going, while I'm more a day-to-day eater of horror, I think. But yeah, we are big horror fans. There's a lot of horror fans inside the studio as well. Oh, here we go.
Trailer begins. Let's get out of the way.
Scratching at the walls, itching to be set free. It's changing you.
Is that it? Are you sad, Alan? Are you afraid? Do you have regrets?
It's turning you inside out. You can feel it, can't you? You know that deep within the rotten heart of the Barclay Mansion lies a truth only the dead can understand.
I mean, it started with a coffee, as most things do in Sweden, I think. Fika and the coffee. It was not this summer, but last summer, so 2019. I had a coffee with one of our friends over at Paradox Interactive, who Paradox is the brand owner of World of Darkness. Yeah, no, so it started with a coffee, and they wanted to branch out with the World of Darkness because they were focusing a lot on Vampire the Masquerade, of course, which is the big sort of IP inside.
I want that avatar in VR chat. That's my dream. Yeah. If anyone can make it.
Yeah, I mean, they're releasing the second game next year, so it's bound to come. But that's how it started, Eric, and then you got your sugar tooth for horror VR and World of Darkness since you played the RPGs as well.
Yeah, I still play pen and paper RPGs as much as I can, even though with COVID has made that trickier too. So Wraith the Oblivion is a pen and paper RPG published in the 90s where you play a wraith. Basically, you're dead. And Wraith the Oblivion has this awesome fantasy world, big world. It feels a bit like, I guess, how you'd guess I can describe it a bit like a Neil Gaiman, Lucifer kind of thing. But when we talk to Paradox, they say basically they want to reintroduce Wraith to the world and to video games and VR. They asked us if we could make something that, I guess, introduced people, everybody, to Wraith the Oblivion, and basically, so we said, okay, let's build a really creepy horror game where you basically see only one layer of this Wraith universe. So you play a poor dead guy called Ed Miller. He's a photographer, and he's recently dead. And you're roaming the halls of the Barclay Mansion, which is a mansion somewhere in the Thousand Oaks area of Los Angeles. And Barclay was a movie producer, so the story is kind of set against a Hollywood backdrop. So basically, I really wanted to write something with all of the scandal, all of the booze, the drugs, the sex, and everything like that, and the death, of course, because people are dead in our game. So.
There's a lot of booze in the game.
There's a lot of booze. Yeah.
Oh.
I guess I had to cleanse my palate after writing Curious Tale of the Stolen Pets.
A lot of parties as well.
More sordid, I guess.
What was it like for you to write for this game, and how different it was compared to writing for, budget cuts too? Or Curious Tale?
Yeah, exactly. So all our games so far. I mean, we're not a tiny studio anymore. There are 25, 26 of us now. But I mean, it's we still work on a fairly tight budget, etc. So I'd say Apex Construct, Budget Cuts 2, and Curious Tale are basically, there aren't a lot of speaking roles in the game. Whereas in Afterlife, we really wanted the larger cast, more characters with really unique voices, etc. So and we wanted the player to. We still stick to the kind of storytelling we've done, which is what the Devouring team said earlier. It's much more fun to let the player explore and figure out stuff themselves and try to connect the dots. There's way more dialogue in this game than in our previous ones. There's way more scenes actually playing out, which has been both a challenge and a really fun thing to do, to build cut scenes, I guess, in VR, but basically letting the player walk around inside them and watch them from any angle. So yeah, I guess that's been the biggest change since our previous titles, is that there's so many more characters, and we think the game is going to be somewhere between 7 to 10 hours. We're not sure yet exactly. And basically having people, understanding as much as possible from what we tell them, but basically then filling in the blanks themselves by exploring and finding the other material in the building. So that has been quite different.
I think one thing as well to add maybe is that in the game, this time around at least, and comparing to Apex Construct and Buddy Cuts, where you had weapons, you had a bow where you can shoot stuff or throw knives and take down the robots. This time you have to be much more cautious on defense on the defense. So even though you are a Wraith, you will have different Wraith powers, like you can pull objects towards you from a distance, you can squeeze through walls. It's much more about staying away from the dangers in this game. So there are specters roaming the mansion, and you have other antagonists chasing you. So I think it's a little bit like we pulled some inspiration from games like Amnesia that you guys mentioned as well, Devouring team, and Alien Isolation, in the fact that you need to use the environment to hide, use the elements around you to maybe lure the specters away, stuff like that. So it's you are dead and you are a Wraith, but it doesn't mean that you're powerful. You're not really that powerful compared to the other inhabitants in the mansion, which is really a cool feeling to have.
It's very much a stealth game. It's very much about staying away from the evil, or from trouble, and I think that's also something that works so well in VR. Something as simple as just peeking, around a corner or crouching behind a chair, hiding from something, is just so immensely satisfying and fun to do, and physical, which is a lot of fun. It's so easy to end up with something that looks and feels like, say, Resident Evil or something, because there are some mansions in horror games that are just so iconic that it's hard to not end up that way. And we wanted to build something that felt modern, I guess, in a way as well. It turned out we eventually looked a lot at 1930s architecture, so it wasn't that modern after all. Modern architecture is so very white and bright and often quite tacky. Pardon me. If you happen to live in a Hollywood mansion, there's a slight chance it just looks a little bit tacky sometimes, and we didn't want that. So our art director, who is also our concept artist, who's made all these images, and us basically in a group, worked our way toward this art style, I guess. So our specters, the enemies of the game, there aren't a ton of them in the game. We said that instead of having tons of enemies with no personality, let's make sure that we have very few enemies. They have clear personalities. We should get to know or learn through the course of the game. Who they were in life, why they died, why they are here. Specters are basically beings driven by hate who can't let go of things that happen to them in life. And we wanted our specters to have a very clear. You should be able to look at them and understand how they died. That was a very important thing to us as well.
I love that aspect of the game. The fact that this tall guy here, we call him. Should we say what we call him internally? Maybe not.
I mean, he's the Wall.
Of course, we want all the juicy
He's the
gossips.
He's a Wall Street. He's a Wall Street guy who died in the 80s. And that's also a cool thing with what we said about specters. Basically, anything that was special about them while they were alive basically gets amplified after death. So he was a tall guy. He was like 2 meters long, but after dying, I think he's 3.20 or something like that meters tall.
He's extreme,
which means that he can look over things. He can see you in different ways, which makes him an interesting stealth opponent as well.
Mm-hmm.
We also have
how about
one
the gameplay
actual,
mechanics?
So gameplay mechanics.
Go on.
Sorry, I just want to add one thing about the narrative. One thing I think we forgot to mention as well. We have a companion in the game that is really crucial to your experience, and it's really a Wraith ingredient as well, and it's called the Shadow, and it's your dark subconscious that will be talking to you throughout the game, and basically push you on to different objectives, telling you what to do or where to go, but you don't really know if you can trust him or not, and you don't really know his motivations for being there and letting you know things about what's going on. So that's I think at least that's something you really, really nailed, Eric, with this game, the shadow part in the experience. It's hearing this creepy voice over your shoulder whispering into your ear, oh, someone is coming, stuff like that. It's really I get goosebumps right now actually by just talking about it.
Is anybody here a pen and paper RPG player? No.
Future maybe.
Future, yeah. But so the thing about the Wraith. Yeah. Oh yeah, cool. Good. One of you. So the thing with Wraith is that a really cool part of the role-playing game that we built a lot of our game around is that when you die, your soul is kind of split in two. There's the Wraith, the psyche, that's you, and then there's the shadow, which is, I mean, these are Jungian terms. I'm not super into Carl Jung psychology. But the thing is, it has these clear. It's basically like this old cartoon, the devil on your shoulder, who basically tells you, all the bad things about yourself, and what you really want to do, what you should be doing, and also basically his own whole intent is basically he wants you to fail, he wants you to be miserable, which is has been interesting to write as well, and not necessarily, and also make him a bit entertaining, which I hope he is.
Okay, yeah. So I'm curious about the gameplay mechanics. Am I expected to solve puzzles? Will there be any combat?
So you'll definitely be expected to solve puzzles in the game. We said early on, it's a stealth game, slow movement mainly. There are puzzles to solve. There isn't any combat as such, and you have no way of hurting your enemies. That's one of the earliest things we decided, that the player should never ever get a weapon of any kind, because giving a player a weapon of any kind is a very quick way to influence how they think about the game for the rest of the duration of the game. So we said no weapons at all, 0. And we also said about puzzles, to try to make our puzzles as location believable as possible. There are some really cool. One of my favorite game series ever is the Resident Evil series, and I love these super weird chess piece puzzles in the tunnels, under police stations, etc. We also said, let's not do anything like that. Let's make sure our puzzles are, we should always be able to explain, why does the player have to solve this puzzle in this room? All the pieces should be more or less logical. It's a game, so you can't stay true to that, because that makes it. If you stick too hard to stuff like that, you just create boring stuff, I believe. But puzzles, lots of exploring. That's one of VR's greatest strengths, I feel. Basically, lots of exploring, lots of looking around. And lots of learning to find your way around this mansion, to find the, which parts, might or might not be safe, and basically find your way around. There's a very light, this is also something we tend to do, I guess. There's a light Metroidvania thing where basically powers you, when you unlock powers throughout the game, these unlock new parts of the building for you and let you do different things.
So you brought up earlier that you got the shadow that's talking to you, and you don't know if you can trust it. So in that question alone, that presents kind of like a design choice, potentially. Like, how did you tackle the concept of making the player feel invested, like they're making the choice to trust it or not?
So I think what we said with the shadow is that, because he is the one that introduces you to the world of the dead, and he does tell you true things, and he does sometimes tell you things that aren't true. So I think it's we don't have that's another thing we said we're not branching a lot story-wise, depending on what you trust, etc. I think we said let's focus on creating one strong story instead of a multitude of potentially strong ones. I love branching storylines, but it's also it's we said for this one let's focus on one story.
What is the difference for you of designing this game in VR compared to if you had to design it not for VR?
So it's I mean there's so many really cool horror games outside VR, some really cool ones inside VR as well, but I think the major strengths of VR is putting the player in there and making sure that you should be able to feel your presence, more of a physical thing, to touch stuff, and basically make the world around the player behave, in a way that feels natural. It feels intuitive. Flat screen games never have that problem, because if a flat screen game wants to make something feel natural and realistic, you'd probably do that via animation or something like that. Right now I'm playing the new Amnesia game, Amnesia Rebirth, which, by the way, it's a fantastic game. But I keep wishing, shit, they should have built this for VR. It would have been so amazing to experience that wonderful world, and fairly scary world too, in VR. But the fact that I'm not in the world, it just adds this. It adds a I guess it's like a glass. It's like a window. you look through the world through a window instead of being in it. And I think if you build anything for VR, you should make sure that you're being in the world should be the first thing you think of. The rest comes after.
And and for a developer like you, how much does building something for VR impact the scale and, let's say, the scope of what you're building?
I think scope is actually the actual building of the game, that the craft, I guess, is extremely, I'd say, similar to building flat screen games. If you're good at building games for flat screen, you're probably going to be good at building games for VR. The hurdle to get through is basically making all the mistakes that everybody who starts building for VR after having spent tons of time building flat screen games, spends a lot of time making mistakes, thinking stuff is going to work game design wise in a similar way. But when it comes to just build, assets, etc., stuff like that, it's very, very similar. There's a very big difference between, building for a high-end console versus building for the Oculus Quest, of course. We, at least at Fast Travel, think of performance from day one. It's like me and our CTO, Christopher, probably, people probably get tired of hearing us hammering, everybody about performance and draw calls, less draw calls, optimize. I think that's yeah. I think that's the major difference. I know I didn't think as much on performance before we started Fast Travel Games.
And that, I guess, also defines the whole game design and everything.
It does impact. Yeah. The game will be out on both tethered and untethered platforms, and it definitely impacts, how we build stuff. And it's much more fun to scale up than to, build something that looks marvelous and then just take stuff away until it's playable on a machine with lesser, CPU or GPU.